Today was day one in Donna Adelson's case, and we started off the day with opening statements. So the opening statement was given by Sarah Dugan for the prosecution, just like she did in Charlie Adelson's case. So she started off by explaining that the Adelsons had a very big problem, and that problem was Dan Markel. But they had a solution to that problem because the solution was Charlie Adelson, because his girlfriend had connections to the type of people that would kill him. So, July 18th, 2014, that is when Dan Markel was shot in broad daylight in the driveway of his home. Actually, it was in the garage. He had two sons at the time, 3 and 4 years old. He just dropped them off from preschool, went to work out, and then came home where he was murdered. Pulled into the driveway, pulled into the garage, and he was being followed by Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera, who pulled in behind him, and Sigfredo Garcia was the one who actually pulled the trigger. Dan Markel's neighbor heard the gunshot and came out, saw a light-colored Toyota Prius pull out and speed away. Well, then he went over to the garage. He found Dan Markel. He saw the window that was shattered, saw his glasses and phone on the ground, and Dan Markel was unresponsive, so he called 911. Then law enforcement arrived, and Dan Markel actually survived for 14 hours before being pronounced dead. Now, the law enforcement, what they had to do is they had to take two separate paths in order to reach a very similar conclusion. And that was, one path was to follow the murderers, the actual people who committed the murder, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. That was one path that law enforcement had to follow. And then there was another path that they had to follow, which was the motive. Why would somebody want to kill Dan Markel? And after going down both paths, law enforcement arrived at the same conclusion. Both paths led directly to Donna Adelson. Now, they also led to Charlie Adelson, but this is the trial of Donna Adelson, so they have to say that it led to Donna Adelson. Now, as you may have known already by this point, there was a very nasty divorce. This is what the prosecutor laid out in the opening statement, that I should say Sarah Dugan, that there was this very nasty divorce going on with Wendy Adelson, who was Donna Adelson's daughter. Wendy really wanted to relocate to Miami with her children. Miami and Tallahassee are not exactly close to each other, and she felt that she was stuck in Tallahassee because that's where Dan Markel worked. He worked as a professor, and that's where the children were. And Wendy very much wanted to relocate to Miami. In fact, she asked the court in a filing to relocate to Miami and have the children and then relocate to Miami if necessary. Well, Dan, of course, was opposed to this because his work as a law professor was in Tallahassee. And that motion was denied, and it was denied with prejudice, which means that Wendy Adelson is never going to be able to litigate that issue again. The issue of relocation was over, and that is what came down very close to when Dan Markel was murdered. Now, Donna Adelson hated Dan Markel. This is all, again, from the prosecutor's opening statement. She hated Dan Markel, and you can tell from the emails who was the driving force that Wendy had to relocate. And Donna was an extremely controlling person, and she had very strong opinions about Wendy's life. She also had strong opinions and exhibited some level of control about who she dated and who she wanted her to date, things like that. If Wendy didn't do what Donna wanted her to do, well, then what she did was she employed Charlie Adelson, her son, to work on Wendy, getting Wendy to do what Donna wanted her to do. So Donna was desperate to find a way for Wendy to relocate to Miami, despite there being already that last motion that was filed by Wendy that was denied with prejudice. Still, Donna very much wanted to figure out some way to relocate Wendy and the children to Miami. And in one of the emails, she said that you deserve more, and Dan is holding you hostage in Tallahassee. And not only that, but Donna was also very involved in the divorce case. And this is going to be an issue that comes up later, which we're going to show you probably what I think is the most interesting clip from today's proceedings about this issue. But Donna Adelson was very involved in the divorce. In fact, she was drafting and editing certain documents before they were filed, and she was giving Wendy a guilt trip about how much time they were spending on this, that Donna and Harvey were spending on this, the parents of Wendy Adelson were spending on this, and they were losing time from work and losing sleep and adding stress, and giving Wendy this guilt trip about what this divorce is doing to their family. And in fact, there was an email that said relocation was the most important priority, or should be the most important priority for Wendy. Again, this is an email from Donna, and that it is non-negotiable. Well, June 2013 is when that ruling came down denying that motion with prejudice. So that was in June 2013. The murder happened in July of 2013. Well, after Donna said, after that, meaning after the order came down denying Wendy's motion to relocate, well, Donna said in an email that Dan didn't beat the Adelson family yet. We are a team, and we are going to figure out how to relocate you to Miami. And she started making these crazy, outlandish, and wild suggestions. For example, bribing Dan Markel to move down there, offering him $1 million to move down there. And you know, Wendy, Donna told her, you know how to aggravate him. You should aggravate him like he aggravates us. Make him miserable. That was the plan, to make Dan's life so miserable that he would have no choice but to relocate. Now, one of the plans that Donna had was the fact that she knew that Dan was devoutly Jewish. And what she suggested was that Wendy dress up the children, his two children, which were his happiness in life, to dress up the children as though they are going to church, and then post it on social media that you are converting them to Christianity and getting them baptized. And she said, Donna told Wendy that you have to put on the acting performance of a lifetime in order to get this done. Even if she had to dress them up in Nazi uniforms in order to get this relocation, that was also not off the table. Donna would never give up or stop fighting. And this is, again, all from the prosecution. So I'm just reiterating what the prosecution said in my own words. But a lot of them are her words also. All right. Now, Donna's closest confidant was Charlie. They talked multiple times a day. And I think this word could have been used in the prosecution, but the word that Jeffrey Lacasse used, which is ingrained in my head, is this is a family that is unhealthy, enmeshed in each other's business. Donna is just enmeshed in all of the Adelson business, personal and business. All right. Well, then she would use dramatic terms. Donna would use dramatic terms to Charlie, like life and death terms, like crazy person, like impossible to deal with, extreme amount of stress that this divorce is causing her. And then Donna would rely on Charlie to solve her problems. If Donna had a problem, then she would call on Charlie to solve that problem for her. Now, even though the divorce was final, a year before, there was still ongoing litigation. There's constantly filings about the custody. There's a custody battle and that violation of orders. And there's just constant filings with respect to the divorce, even though the divorce was final. So that was continually happening, even though the divorce was final a year before. Now, a couple months before the murder, there was a filing in the court. Dan actually filed in the court that Donna Adelson is disparaging him in front of his own kids, calling him stupid, saying that he's trying to take away her grandchildren from her. And therefore, Dan asked the court that Donna Adelson should not get unsupervised time with the children. And this motion was actually pending when he was killed. Now, what do you know? After he was murdered, guess what? All of a sudden, the kids and Wendy were able to relocate to Miami. Now, Harvey and Charlie were dentists, and Donna managed the office. Not only did she manage the office, as Sarah Dugan laid out, but she also managed the home and the lives of the entire Adelson family. And Wendy came up with this alibi. Wendy told the police that she was at home getting her TV fixed when Dan was murdered. And in fact, Wendy, when asked by law enforcement if her family had a motive to kill Dan Markel, her answer was yes. They actually had a reason to dislike him more than anybody else. And what was interesting was that she made phone calls to her parents when she was being interviewed by the police to let them know that Dan was shot. And then after the phone call, she told the police the following: well, they acted surprised, so that's a relief. Wow. Well, that's, again, another strong point that Sarah Dugan brought out in opening statement. And then she said that Charlie actually joked, quote unquote, about hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel as a divorce present, but instead bought her a TV instead, a word that we will see coming up as a code word for what was going on with Dan Markel. So he bought her a TV, which also served as her alibi because her TV was getting repaired, which a lot of people have some serious questions about getting that TV repaired. But anyway, there's also some phone and SunPass records, which she tells the jury that they're going to find out about. And because of this phone and SunPass records, they were able to track down the murderers in this case, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. And because of all the moving parts in this investigation, that is why it took so long. That is a very important part that you have to stress in this case, because the murder did happen 11 years ago. So why did it take the law enforcement so long for them to round up all the murderers and start charging Katie McManua and Charlie Adelson and Donna Adelson? Why is it taking so long? Well, that's part of what Sarah Dugan is laying out, that there's reasons why this took so long. There's 2 different paths we had to take. It was very difficult to track down these people, and she kind of showed that in her opening statement, and they're also making a point of that during the witness testimony. Now, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera, what they did is they left Miami 2 days before the murder. They turned their phones off before the murder, then turned them back on once they were long out of Tallahassee. Again, just trying to show how we know for sure that they actually were the ones who killed Dan Markel. Video caught them at an ATM. Katie McManus and Sigfredo Garcia shared 2 children together, and they constantly have an on-again and off-again relationship. And apparently, at some point, she was 2-timing with Sigfredo Garcia as well as Charlie Adelson. Not that that's so relevant, but that's what came out today. And Katie McManus also is a frequent contact of Charlie Adelson during this whole time that this was going on. So that was one of the paths that the police took. And then another path that they took is they followed the money, right? Always follow the money. So they followed the money, and months after Rivera and Garcia were after this murder, well, guess what? All of a sudden they started buying things, buying expensive motorcycles and cars. And Katie McManus received a breast augmentation, and she also all of a sudden received a Lexus, who was previously owned by Harvey Adelson, none other than Harvey Adelson. And there was a huge spike in her cash deposits in her account all of a sudden when she wasn't employed anywhere. Where'd she get that cash from? So very clearly where she's getting the cash from. And on top of that, Donna Adelson all of a sudden added Katie McManus to the payroll checks, which she signed. So she's signing these additional payroll checks. They're going to Katie McManus when it's very clear that Katie McManus is not working for the Adelson Institute. And then they talk about the phone records patterns. So when you look at the phone records, there's a pattern of communication here. And that is that Donna always calls Charlie. Charlie then calls Katie McManus. Katie McManus then calls Sigfredo Garcia, and then back the other way. Sometimes Sigfredo Garcia calls Luis Rivera, but that is how it works. There's no break in that communication. Charlie's never talking to Sigfredo Garcia, and Donna's never talking to Katie McManus. It's always Donna, Charlie, Katie, Sigfredo Garcia. All right. Then she talks about the bump. As we all know already, the bump. So they had to figure out a way that the people are going to start talking about this case, because this was 2 years. They're investigating this case for 2 years, and now they got to figure out, the police have to figure out, how are we going to get the Adelsons to start talking about what happened. So they got authority for the wiretap, but now they have to get them talking about what happened. So that's when they orchestrated the bump. And what happened here is that they had a law enforcement go undercover, pose as a blackmailer who hands down a piece of paper about Dan Markel's murder, a phone number, and the amount of $5,000. And he tells Don Adelson that he knows that the Adelsons are taking care of Katie, but somebody else is not being taken care of. And we need to make sure that person's taken care of. Here's the phone number, $5,000. See you later. Well, what does Donna Adelson do? Does she call the police? No, that's not what she does. Because why would you call the police? You don't want to start up with the Latin gangs. So what she did was that she first called Charlie. Did I say Latin gangs? Latin kings. So what she did first was she called Charlie Adelson, her son, not the police, and never said Dan Markel's name. And she said that she received some paperwork and needs to talk in person with him. And it involves both of us, the two of us. Tells Charlie Adelson to bring cash, and the TV is probably about 5. So obviously code for what's going on, $5,000, TV, referring to the murder of Dan Markel. Okay, but this is her first course of action, which is always going to be very difficult to explain why she was taking this course of action, talking about TVs, talking about $5,000 that involves both of us when she had no idea about anything that was going on. Okay, so she also mentioned an ex-girlfriend of Charlie, that it has to do something with your ex-girlfriend. And Charlie never asks which ex-girlfriend, because since Katie McManua, Charlie's been through other girls also. He had 2 girlfriends since Katie McManua. And as soon as she says it has to do with your old girlfriend, your ex-girlfriend, he didn't ask which one, because I go through a lot of girlfriends. No, he knew already immediately that it was Katie McManua. That's why he immediately called Katie McManua. All right. No one ever reported the blackmail to the police. Okay. Now, in these phone calls that kept being made throughout this time, they were being very careful in the phone calls. They would meet in person, and at some point they met in person. And Donna Adelson gave the paperwork to Charlie. And now, as we know, when Donna has a problem, who does she go to? Charlie Adelson. He says, Charlie, you take care of my problem. This is my newest problem. You take care of it. And what does he do? Well, he calls Katie McManua. All right, then they meet in a restaurant at some point, which there was also a wire where they were being recorded, and they discuss whether the man, this person, this bump, was a police officer. Was this really an undercover cop? They were actually onto this idea. Or was it a person actually who's blackmailing them? That is the quote they were discussing at the restaurant. Now, Charlie thought that if it's a policeman, this is what he told Katie McManua also, that if it's a policeman, then it's a good sign. Why is it a good sign? Because that must mean that they do not have enough evidence to charge anyone. That's why they're doing these undercover operations, right? So, and this is an interesting thing that he said, which I thought could have been brought back. But what he said was, if they had any evidence on us, we would have already gone to the airport. Well, what did Donna do after Charlie was convicted? Okay, well, anyway. So then Charlie tries to explain to Katie McManua why this is a good thing if it's the police. It means they don't have enough evidence, because in order to convict somebody, you have to put somebody at the crime. And he's just talking nonsense. He's talking about his understanding of the law, which is not really the accurate law. So he starts saying, yeah, it must be that they lack evidence, and they need to put a person at the crime of the scene, and they have to do all these other things that he doesn't, you need an actual eyewitness that they're involved. So didn't understand a lot of things about circumstantial evidence. Nevertheless, that's what he's telling Katie McManua. So he said that there was a few different ways that they can deal with it. One of the ways that they're concerned about, if they just give this guy money, then maybe he's really a blackmailer. If it's the police, well then, okay, we're happy with that. But if it's not the police, it's a blackmailer, well then they may come back, right? Usually blackmailers aren't just happy with your $5,000. Oh, just give us $5,000, then we'll go away. No, they won't. They'll come right back the next week and say, oh, by the way, we need another $5,000. So that's what they were nervous about with the blackmail. So he thought, Charlie, that the best solution would be to have the blackmailer killed. Because, as Charlie Adelson said, so help me God, if they F with my family, it will be Nazi, another curse word. I don't care what I spend. I will have them killed, essentially. That's what he was saying. So, after meeting with Katie McManua, Charlie then calls Donna Adelson, and again, using code words, and then you see, Sarah Dugan just lays out this pattern again. We have Katie McManua calling Sigfredo Garcia, and Katie McManua actually asked Sigfredo Garcia to call that number that was left by the bump to Don Adelson, which she then turned over to Charlie, which then turned it over to Katie. Katie then turned it over to Sigfredo Garcia and said, hey, you call this number. So later, after this event, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera are arrested. And at that point, Luis Rivera cuts a deal with the police. And he begins to talk. He tells them everything. Tells them about being hired, that Katie McManus was the one who was in charge of getting them the money, and that he did get money. And the money was actually in stacks of stapled hundreds. So 1,000 each in each stack, stapled together. And they were also wet. They were wet, washed. October 2016, Katie McManus was arrested. And something that Sarah Dugan also mentioned is that this is exactly how the money was stapled and washed, at least stapled, was the way that the Adelsons kept their cash from this dental practice in the safe, because they did offer cash discounts. So they did have a lot of cash on them all the time, and they would keep it in the safe, and they would staple it this way for some reason. In March 2022, Charlie Adelson was indicted, and then Catherine McManus took the stand, and she insisted that she had no knowledge of what was going on. And this was in her own trial. But then all of a sudden she decided to change her story at Charlie's trial and actually say, no, that I did know what was going on. At her own trial, she tried to claim ignorance. But when it came to Charlie's trial, she actually said the truth, what she claims is the truth now, that actually, she was the one hired by Charlie to arrange this whole murder. Well, Donna then went to Charlie's house that night. One of the nights Donna went to Charlie's house and texted him that I'm outside of your house. We're going to hear more about those text messages. And Charlie, in his own trial, took the stand, and he claimed that the Adelsons had nothing to do with it, that this was all a wild double extortion, which the jury deliberated over for 3 hours before coming back with a conviction. But that was Charlie's story. And the prosecutor's allowed to say all this. So Sarah Dugan laid all this out. Katie McManus' story changed, where she finally admitted the truth, like Luis Rivera said. And then Charlie took the stand and claimed the Adelsons had no idea about any of this. And then, as soon as Charlie was convicted, that is when Donna started to make plans to flee the country. And that's when she started making Google searches about which countries are non-extradition countries. And she applied for an emergency visa, put money in trust for her grandkids, and then booked one-way tickets to Vietnam. And days later, when she boarded that flight to Vietnam, that's where she was arrested on the jetway. Now, on top of that, this is some more information that came out more recently, and that was that Donna apparently was offering bribes. Again, this is all from the prosecution, that Donna was offering bribes for false testimony if somebody would be willing to testify that Katie McManus told them different stories than what Katie McManus actually testified to. And in fact, one of the informants, we call these informants, or what the defense will call jailhouse snitches, showed the outline that Donna wrote to them about how she wants them to answer certain questions about Katie McManus. So that's what we have with the informants. And that was essentially the end of the opening statement for the prosecution. Then the defense got up with the opening statement. And this was very interesting to me, because I really wanted to see how the defense was going to present this case. Because we know that in Charlie Adelson's case, the defense got up and right away spilled the entire beans of what their theory of the defense was, which I thought was a terrible, terrible mistake. If you want to have any chance, any shot, then you wait. Don't tell the prosecution about your wild theory of a double extortion so that they can spend their entire case in chief disproving it and showing how it's ridiculous. So that was what they did in Charlie Adelson's case. But in this case, they didn't really say what their theory is going to be. All they said was, and this is Jackie Fulford who got up and gave the opening statement. It was very short, I think. It was pretty short. And she made a few points, but she didn't really say what their theory is going to be. Now, their theory could be ignorance. Their theory could be that, Donna Adelson had no idea what was going on, and the prosecution has no evidence. But it was interesting to see, and I think that definitely it was an improvement from what happened in Charlie Adelson's case. Definitely an improvement for that. But still didn't address all of the points that they made on the prosecution. Almost none of the points that they made on prosecution was talked about. The Vietnam, the one-way ticket, any suggestion about how they're going to try to explain any of that, which again, like I said, is not necessarily wrong in this type of case. maybe they shouldn't come up with some sort of explanation in opening statement so that the prosecution will be on notice and they can start disproving that in their case in chief. Maybe wait till closing arguments or wait all the way till the end of the trial, have Donna Adelson take the stand and explain why she was going to Vietnam. But this is what she did say in the defense opening statement. So the first thing that she said was, you should understand that the state always gets to go first, but I'm asking you to always keep an open mind, right? In their case in chief, they go first also. They get to ask questions first of the witnesses also. But just keep an open mind so that wait for us, right? We'll also be able to cross-examine witnesses and just keep an open mind to hear the entire case, all the evidence, and also our questions that we have to ask. Okay, that's a nice point that the defense always wants to make. And then she said that there was not a single piece of evidence throughout the entire prosecution's opening statement, which was pretty extensive, but there was not a single piece of evidence that showed that Donna planned this or intended that this happen. Now, there was parts of the opening statement here, which I think could have been objected to, because a lot of it, I think, was argument. An argument is not allowed for an opening statement. Now, of course, there are sly ways as an attorney to get in some argument in your opening statement, but there were some parts of here that which were just so clearly argumentative, and it was such more of a closing argument than it was an opening statement, that it could have been objected to. Now, a lot of times attorneys don't like to object because it makes them look like a jerk in front of the jury, and the jury may not like you. Okay, I understand all of this stuff, but there was definitely some parts of this which is argument. Like, for example, that there's not a single piece of evidence that the prosecution spoke about in their opening statement that shows that Donna planned this or intended this. First of all, there is, and that's completely argument. But you could say that there is no evidence that Donna planned this. You know, you can make that, you can say that that's what the evidence is going to show. So that's fine. But there's a lot of other instances also where they, the defense was much more putting on a closing argument than they were an opening statement. Okay. Then she got into this whole long speech about Danny Markel and how special he is. And we shouldn't stop thinking about why we're here. It's because of Danny Markel. And he was an amazing professor. He was very well educated. He was very intelligent. He was asked to speak all over the place. And the most important thing to him was his two boys. And he didn't want this divorce. Wendy just walked out. Wendy wanted the divorce. He didn't want the divorce. And so she gave a long speech about how amazing Danny is, which I think some people were finding a little more cringeworthy. It's definitely a job by the defense attorney to commiserate and to say, look, we completely agree that what happened here was tragic. That's definitely something that almost all defense attorneys do. They say, look, the murder of this innocent victim, of course, is tragic. It's just that it has nothing to do with my client. So that's something, of course, you want to do, but I think it was just a little bit over the top here, where she just kept going on and on about his, about that. Anyway, okay. And she did say that Donna said some very ugly and foul things about Danny Markel. But she also did some good things. She also let the kids stay in front of the Skype so that Dan Markel can read them goodnight stories, bedtime stories. And then another point that she really wanted to make, that Donna is just a normal person. She's just a normal mom, a normal grandmom, just like all of us. She's 64 years old. She was married to her husband, Harvey, for 54 years. And she even went to work at a place that was owned by her son. And I think that she was trying to elicit some sympathy here, saying wow, can you imagine a mother going to work at the office of her son? So she said that. And she is so kind. She is so caring. She's loving. She cares about others more than she cares about herself. So, talking a lot about Donna Adelson like this. Not really talking so much about the facts or the evidence in the case, but okay. And then she talks about the murder, a little bit of the murder, what happened July 18th, 2014. And she says basically that, look, the state can prove that Luis Rivera, Sigfredo Garcia killed him. They can prove that Katie McManus set it all up and that Katie McManus was paid with money in stacks of thousands that were stapled together. And that was all Charlie. That was all Charlie Adelson. What does it have to do with Donna? So there is no evidence at all about Donna. Now, even though, of course, we do know that Donna signed those checks that were made out to Katie McManus for some reason. But, okay, This is all Charlie's money, and the state can prove that. They have some strong evidence for that this is all Charlie Adelson. That's true. But they don't have any sort of evidence. Now, they may have some theory. They may have some motive about why perhaps Donna Adelson would want to kill Dan Markel. But motive is not enough. Motive is not an element for murder. You have to find that she actually was a principal in this murder. Okay, so that was the opening statement. So it didn't really talk so much about the evidence. The argument of all this evidence just shows that Charlie Adelson was involved. I think that was a good point. I think talking so much about Danny, how about he was such an amazing person, I think it was a little bit over the top, a little bit cringeworthy. But I think it's okay. I don't think it's so terrible, because in this type of case, when you're going to have to come up with something a little bit off the wall, you don't want to show all your cards in opening statement. So you do want to say something. You want to make a few points, which I think was fine. I think given the facts of this case and given how difficult the defense is in this case, I can understand why she kind of gave the opening statement that she did. Okay, moving on. So then the first witness that was called was James Geiger, who was a neighbor, the neighbor that we heard about who heard the sound. So he spoke about exactly what was said in the opening statement. He heard the sound. He came out. He saw what he saw. Okay. Then we moved on to David Sims, who was a retired Tallahassee policeman, and he responded to the murder. He was the first on scene, and he explained what he saw. He saw Dan Markel holding a phone in one hand, a business card in the other hand. It seems like he was making a phone call. Half of his eyeglasses were on the floor, half of the eyeglasses were on his lap. He was gasping for air, and then he stayed there until the ambulance came and took him away. All right. Joanne Maltese was a forensic specialist, and basically what she did was she took a lot of photographs at the scene. She collected evidence at the scene, and then she also took evidence from Wendy Adelson and her car, which included actually a very important piece of evidence that a lot of people like to point to about this, and that's something that, if you're not familiar with this trial, you may have not realized the significance of, but there was a receipt in Wendy's car for alcohol. And it was bought that day from a specific store. I think it was called ABC Liquors or something. And that's going to be significant. So file that away in your mind for right now. All right. She also took pictures of Dan Markel at the hospital, and there was some stippling on his arm. And there was also obviously some very gruesome pictures there, which when Donna Adelson saw it, she started breaking down. She was crying. And in fact, Judge Everett had to tell Donna Adelson that she really has to try to control herself, because we can't elicit that type of sympathy from the jury that you're crying over this. We don't want the jury to get the wrong impression here or whatever. So that was just something that he told Donna Adelson if she can try to control her reactions, her emotional reactions in this case. Dr. Anthony Clark, the medical examiner in this case, did over 8,000 autopsies, and no surprise that the cause of death were the 2 bullet holes in his head. That's the cause of death, and the manner of death was homicide. Okay, so then we moved on to Craig Issam. Craig Issam was a lot of these people are retired by the way at this point. So he was the Tallahassee Police Department, and he testified a lot about his involvement in the case, which, first of all, he's talked about how long Dan Markel survived after being shot, which he said was 11 hours, even though we heard before it was like 14 hours. Okay, and then he actually was the one who made first contact with Wendy Adelson. So Wendy Adelson was at the day of the murder eating out with some friends, and he met Wendy Adelson, told her that they have to talk. Then she went down to the station, and he interviewed Wendy Adelson. Now, he also had some ideas about the divorce file. So he got his hands on the divorce file, and he was able to look through the divorce file. So one thing was to show the jury the divorce file. Now, this is where Judge Everett got very upset about something, and people were wondering what is going on. And the reason why people were not sure about what was going on is because you haven't followed Brother Counsel on the pretrial stuff that was going on in Donna Adelson's case. So let me just kind of set the stage for what happened, and then I'm going to play you this clip during this trial, what happened as a result of this confusion. Okay, so let's understand this. Wendy Adelson's divorce file, the prosecution wants to admit the entirety of the divorce file. Why? Because it's voluminous. This is a very contentious divorce. They were filing things left and right, both sides. So it's very contentious, and the prosecution wants to show is that this was a contentious divorce. This is something that you show that this is a motive, right? Very clearly a motive. So the problem with the divorce file is that what does that have to do with Donna Adelson? Does Donna Adelson know anything about the divorce? She has to be the one who knows about the contentious divorce and everything that was being filed in that divorce in order for you to introduce that as evidence. She had to know about it. It's irrelevant, right? So this was an argument. This was the basis of a motion in limine that was filed by the defense that the divorce file should not be admitted into evidence. Here's the problem. The prosecution argued that there is evidence that Donna Adelson knew about some of the filings in the divorce file. How did she know about it? Because there's emails where Donna Adelson is talking about those specific pleadings that were filed. So the prosecution argued back, and this is, again, going back on one of the motion hearings before the trial, the prosecution argued back that at least the portions of the divorce file should be admissible, not to show, again, for the proof of the matter asserted, but it's there to show that Donna Adelson knew about those filings and to create a motive and what type of a reaction she had to some of those filings. And when she was talking about those filings, what she's referring to. So that's why this portion of the divorce file should be admitted. So what the judge ordered, and this is what he ruled a couple weeks ago, was that if the prosecution can show which documents are connected to the emails that Donna Adelson wrote, which showed that she did have knowledge of that portion of the divorce file, that can come into evidence. The other portion of the divorce file cannot come in as evidence, which each individual paper, but it could come in as a demonstrative to show the jury how voluminous the divorce file was. Okay, so what the prosecution did, what Georgia Koppelman did, was that she created two separate binders. She created a binder of the pleadings, which it is clear from the emails that Donna Adelson knew about those pleadings. And then also she created a separate binder with the rest of the divorce file. And she gave them both to the defense. Okay, said, look, this is the binder which we're going to admit into evidence substantively, where you can actually, this will be admitted and the jury can peruse it if they want. And the other binder is just going to be to show the extent of the divorce file. This was turned over to the defense. Now, when she was ready to admit this with Detective Isam, that's when the defense started objecting to certain documents coming in and saying, hey, there was no foundation laid that she knew about that pleading, that she knew about that motion that was filed, the motion for the grandpa or the grandma motion, whether the supervision motion or the relocation motion. You have to first lay the foundation that she knew about it, right? So a lot of times what happens in these type of cases is where if you both know, the prosecution and the defense both know that this is something that I will be able to lay the foundation for, then the defense is not going to object to its admission. We know that you're going to lay the foundation at some point, so fine, we'll just allow you to admit it. We're not going to object to it. But in this case, the defense was objecting to some of those motions, arguing that you're not able to lay the foundation that she actually knew about that pleading. Okay, so this is what was going on at the time. There was objections going on with specific motions. So what Judge Everett got very frustrated with this, because this is something you were supposed to work out beforehand. If you're the defense, the prosecution turned it over to you before, and if you have a problem with it, saying that these documents you don't agree with, you have to let the judge know before. Say, Judge, before we start the trial, or maybe even file something, depending when they actually got these documents, you file something and say, hey, these documents are not, there's no foundation that Donna Adelson knew about them, knew about these pleadings. So let me play for you exactly what happened, and you'll be able to sense the type of frustration that Judge Everett was feeling here. And he basically threatened to send the jury home. Okay, listen to this.
At this point, I'm nearing becoming inclined to send the jurors home for the day, as we are wasting a significant amount of time on matters that were either previously litigated or now are still being challenged for reasons that could have been handled out of court. Mr. Zellman, for any...
He does not want to waste the jury's time. We don't want to have all these arguments when the jury's not in the room. They can't have these arguments when the jury's in the courtroom. So he keeps sending the jury out, and he's like, I don't want to waste their time. And these are matters that could have been taken care of before trial.
Item that is being objected to with State 60 that you are claiming has no tie to your client's communications. You need to look for that binder now.
Part of the objection that we're making concerning that is without laying the foundation through a witness with personal knowledge, there is no tie to my client. anything, and specifically anything post-dissolution, so post July 31st of 2013 that's in here, there's no evidence.
I heard this argument previously.
Yes.
It has been ruled upon.
Yes.
At this point, if the state has multiple witnesses that the foundation can be laid through, your objection will be noted for the record, but we are going to move on. If you need to look through this binder to match it up with specific communications in which you believe no foundation can be laid, you'll need to take the time. As far as wasting the jurors' time on this any further today, what else does the defense need to look through concerning these exhibits?
And listen to what he says right here.
Before we leave here today, if we need to go through every single state exhibit to deal with any objections concerning them, we will do so, however long that takes. But we're not going to be wasting the jurors' time.
So that is what happened, and people are just kind of scratching their heads about what exactly does all this mean, and that's exactly what this means. They're going through these documents and they're arguing about whether it has some sort of nexus to an email that Donna Adelson sent, which would show that she actually knows about that specific pleading. Okay, and he's like very upset that this wasn't done before. What specific documents do you have problems with? And if you have to go through each of the documents right now, or we'll send the jury home, but if we don't, we're going to move on. And then at the conclusion of the day today, then we're going to go through all this. And I don't care how long it takes, but we're going to go through this. And so not to waste any more juror time. So that is what happened today. And luckily they were able to continue on. They figured out a stipulation, how to get on through this issue. And they still left this kind of for the end of the day, which they're going to pick up again Monday morning before trial starts. Okay. So as the direct examination of Craig Esam, so part of the divorce file was able to come in, and what he was saying is that he asked, Georgia Kaufman was asking him, well, what did Donna call Dan Markel? What did she refer to him as? So one point he said, well, he referred to him as Elvis, in some curse words, an a-hole, and a major effer. So yes, Donna Adelson was not too happy with Dan Markel, definitely as they're going through this contentious divorce. So she also spoke about the knowledge of the children starting to attend Christian or Catholic churches and take pictures, and also that he talked about what he found in the emails about her suggesting this bribe of $1 million. And then she also spoke to him about or asked questions about his life insurance. Dan Markel had a significant life insurance, $2.7 million estate about after taking everything into consideration. And then Katie McManuel also started getting compensation from the Adelson Institute. So all this was brought out, and there was no records at all that she worked for the Adelson Institute. And the most interesting part about this at the end was that the fact that Katie McManuel was arrested at some point, and she was able to make one phone call. She made a phone call to her lawyer. That's what she's allowed to do. 20 minutes later, he gets a phone call from Charlie Adelson's lawyer. Why would he get a phone call from Charlie Adelson's lawyer if Charlie had no idea about this, had nothing to do with this? Well, that's what the jury heard with Detective Esam. So what was the cross-examination is that, well, when you're referring to these emails where Donna Adelson is referring to him as this terrible person and an a-hole and Elvis and a major effer and all these things, and the bribe, this is a shared email address, right? I mean, there was an email address which was donnaharvey@gmail.com. Like, it was both of their email address. They both accessed it. And he actually showed him, this is on cross-examination, he showed that certain emails are actually signed as dad. So sometimes actually it's Harvey. It's not Donna. How do you know that this is not all, who knows? Maybe this is all Donna, all Harvey talking about his feelings and not Donna. Maybe Donna thinks the world of Dan Markel. Well, not really. So that's what was brought out on redirect, because on redirect, some of these emails were written by Donna Adelson, Love Mom. And as Wendy Adelson is going to testify, some of these emails were very clearly from Donna Adelson. So that part about this, I mean, like this entire argument that, all the negative things that were said were, the suggestion the inference that maybe some of these statements were made by Harvey and not Donna, that's not going to fly really that well, because you can point out the certain emails which are signed by Mom, and Wendy Adelson's also going to testify about it. So, but still, they did want to, at least by the defense, they did want to establish that this is a shared email address. Fine. Okay, and then he asked him also interesting question. He says, you didn't see that they kept records for any of the other employees at the Adelson Institute, the people that were actually working there. You didn't see, did you look through their records to see if they worked there? Maybe they don't keep records for any of their workers, any of their employees. They don't give any W-2s or any sort of documentation to, which is, again, a little bit of a ridiculous suggestion, but that's what they brought out on cross-examination. So, okay. Then they had Luis Rivera. Luis Rivera took the stand, and he just laid out everything that he did, and he said that he pled guilty to second-degree murder. He's serving a 19-year sentence, which is concurrent with a federal crime that he committed, a federal sentence. And the federal feds obviously made no deal with him that he should testify in the state action. What do the feds care about the state action? But the deal was that he had to tell the truth. So he's telling the truth now, and he doesn't really know. He actually said he doesn't really know who asked Katie McBanawa to arrange this murder, but he just knows that Katie McBanawa was the middle person who got them to commit this murder. And the purpose, he understood, was so that Wendy should be able to get the kids. So that he understood, and that's a significant part, obviously, that was the motive behind this murder. Now, if that's the motive behind this murder, it inserts Donna much stronger as a suggestion that she was part of this, because even Luis Rivera knew that this was all about Wendy getting the kids. Okay. He also spoke about, Katie McBanawa's relationship with Charlie Adelson, that he knew that Katie McBanawa was in this relationship with Charlie Adelson at the same time that she was in a relationship with Sigfredo Garcia. But he did not have any contact with the Adelson family. Katie McBanawa was in charge of getting them the money, and his cut was going to be $35,000. It took them 2 trips. The first trip they came and they followed Dan Markel, and they went to a daycare, but he didn't want to do it in front of the kids, by a daycare. So that fell through. And then they came a second time to Tallahassee, and they knew that Dan Markel, somehow they knew this, that Dan Markel was leaving the next day. So they knew that it had to be today or they're going to lose their opportunity. So that info that they got came through Katie McBanawa somehow. All right. They threw the gun in the ocean and talked about the staple money and that he bought a motorcycle. So that was it, really. And then across examination, I think there's like one little bit of a moment where the defense attorney, I think that this was Jackie Fulford, who said something about how really Wendy was the one who wanted him killed and not so much Donna, which people are starting to think, hey, is she trying to throw Wendy under the bus? And the answer to that is, if you're an attorney, you only have one client that you care about, and that is the client that's in the defense chair. And that is Donna Adelson. So if you have to throw Wendy under the bus, then that's what you're going to have to do. If you're going to throw Charlie under the bus, that's what you're going to have to do. So that could be that's what she was suggesting. So that was the extent of today, day 1. We're going to be continuing day 2, which Wendy actually may be taking the stand on Monday. I think by all reports, she will be taking the stand on Monday. So definitely join us right back here, Brother Counsel Studios, or otherwise known as Brother Counsel University, Monday morning, 9:30 a.m. is when the trial is going to start. We may start the stream a little bit earlier to catch any of the proceedings before the jury comes in, but the jury is supposed to start at 9:30. So we'll see you all back here Monday morning for the continued live stream of Donna Adelson's trial. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and we will see you next time.